William Seabrook, born February 22, 1884, was an American writer and journalist who worked for the New York Times. After serving in the military and fighting on behalf of the French in World War I, Seabrook developed an obsession for the occult and, more infamously, cannibalism. Throughout the 1920s, Seabrook traveled to Western Africa to partake in ritualistic cannibalism practiced by the tribes that live there. However, the tribe that hosted him did not allow Seabrook to partake, and he instead resorted to cooking pieces of human meat from a local hospital and eating them himself. Afterwards, in 1930, he published a book titled Jungle Ways, detailing his experiences there. It was like good, fully developed veal, not young but not yet beef. It was so nearly like good, fully developed veal that I think no person with a palate of ordinary, normal sensitiveness could distinguish it from veal. It was this obsession with the human flesh and the occult that led him to writing his 1929 book, The Magic Island. Seabrook based this book off of Haitian folklore stories, specifically voodoo magic used to reanimate corpses into living monsters known as zombie. At this time, Seabrook had no way of knowing his obsession for the occult would be the spark that eventually resulted in its own entire subgenre of horror. Zombies have become easily one of the most iconic and well-established monster creatures over the course of the last century, with countless numbers of books, comics, TV shows, movies, games, songs, and more. In its most basic form, a zombie is simply a reanimated corpse. A body which once was dead filled again with some sort of life. That's about all you need to have a monster that just about anyone could identify as a zombie. There are of course many more commonly used tropes, but not every version fulfills these, even though some of them seem like givens. For the modern idea of a zombie, we usually think of a limping, rotting corpse that have basically no brain power or thoughts aside from devouring any human flesh in sight. While this is what zombies are to us now, this wasn't always the case. But how did they become what they are today, and why? And where is their design headed? That's what we'll be taking a look at in this video. Let's take a few steps back. The word zombie originates from the Haitian Creole word zombie, which became zombie after the introduction of French during the start of their occupation in the 17th century. While zombies have existed as an idea for at least hundreds of years, it didn't become well known outside of Haiti until the United States occupation of the country beginning in 1915. Seabrook's book, The Magic Island, helped bring attention to the concept of zombies, but was greatly assisted by a film adaptation it received in 1932 titled White Zombie. The story follows Madeline Short and her fiancé Neil Parker, who just recently were reunited in Haiti with plans to marry that night. Unfortunately for them, their host and wealthy plantation owner Charles Beaumont became quickly infatuated with Madeline and desired her for his own. Beaumont secretly communes with a local voodoo magic master named Murder in hopes he can assist in stopping their marriage before it happens. Murder shows Beaumont his sugarcane mill operated completely by mind-controlled zombies and offers him what he deems the only solution to his problem, transforming Madeline into one of them. He gives Beaumont a vial of liquid and instructs him to place it in Madeline's glass of wine and that he'll take care of the rest. After she's buried, Beaumont and Murder enter Madeline's tomb to steal her body and reanimate her corpse using his voodoo magic. Neil visits the tomb shortly after this and finds it open without the coffin, causing him to suspect she's still alive. He consults with the missionary who is to wed them and is told about how Murder has turned many people into zombies. Now, with high suspicion, the two make their way to Murder's castle. Meanwhile, at the castle, Beaumont shows his dissatisfaction for Madeline in her current state, since she acts as nothing more than a puppet. Beaumont asks Murder to turn her back, but Murder refuses and instead offers a toast to Beaumont to celebrate their accomplishment. He takes a sip and realizes too late that Murder has poisoned his drink, and he too slowly begins to turn into a zombie. Neil and the missionary arrive at the castle and Murder orders his zombies, including Madeline, to attack them. During the attack, Beaumont, still barely in control of his body, pushes Murder off of a cliff and falls in with him. Doing so causes all of the zombies to come back to their senses, and Madeline and Neil get their happy ending. As I'm sure you noticed, the zombies here operate significantly different than what we're used to now. Even calling them zombies feels like a bit of a stretch because they operate more like hypnotized people than undead. Murder basically acted as a ventriloquist, controlling the zombies like lifeless puppets as they did rather mundane tasks for him. The zombies have a definitive master, and they do anything their master commands them to do. While this is quite different to what's most common today, there are still examples of this in modern media with beings like necromancers controlling the undead to act out their evil deeds. And even though they are reanimated corpses in this case, after murder died, Madeline returned back to her normal self even though she technically died. It's never explained in detail how the voodoo magic works, but it seems as if she was brought back to life, but only with one half of her soul. To further elaborate on this, we have to take a look at Haitian folklore. It was believed that each person had a soul with two halves, Bon Ange and Gros Bon Ange, or the little good angel and the big good angel. The big good angel holds the personality and memory of the soul, and the little good angel is what enables a person's consciousness to self-reflect upon themselves. It's said that a zombie is one who is missing one of these two halves, leaving them as mostly a shell of a human being. What's probably happening is Murder was holding one half of Madeline's soul hostage to control her, but it was returned to her after Murder died. While Seabrook's story isn't the first to include bringing bodies back to life, that was done prior by authors like Mary Shelley, Edgar Allan Poe, and Lovecraft, it is crucially important to the foundation of zombie films afterward and started the use of the term zombie altogether. More zombie films followed with similar concepts, such as 1943's I Walked with a Zombie that was also strongly based on Haitian folklore. White Zombie actually had a sequel titled Revolt of the Zombies, but it kinda sucked and isn't very significant anyway, so we don't talk about it. Also, if you're wondering why Murder looks more like a vampire lord than a Haitian voodoo magician, it's because the same guy actually played as Dracula in the film a year prior, Bela Lugosi. And coincidentally enough, the next milestone in zombie history actually has more to do with vampires than zombies. The 1954 Richard Matheson book, I Am Legend. Yes, oddly enough, a book about vampires is one of the more significant works in the zombie catalog. The novel follows Robert Neville, the seemingly sole survivor of a worldwide pandemic that has turned all other humans into vampires. The vampires in this novel follow many of the standard vampire rules, like being bloodsuckers, dying from wooden stake wounds to the heart, and hating sunlight, garlic, and crucifixes. Throughout the novel, Neville researches and conducts experiments on the vampires and eventually comes to the conclusion that the cause of the disease is a bacillus strain of bacteria that his body is immune to. The book goes into great detail about scientific reasoning behind the vampire's weakness, such as sunlight exposure causing the bacteria to switch from anaerobic parasites into an aerobic one, which quickly consumes its host, hence why sunlight will kill them. He also discovers that there are both conscious and unconscious vampires. Conscious vampires being ones with hosts that are still alive, and unconscious vampires being those with dead hosts partially reanimated from their infection. After being in solitude for a few years, he manages to find another human survivor, a woman named Ruth. They slowly gain trust for each other, and he shows her all he's discovered about the disease. He suggests testing her for it, and she immediately knocks him unconscious. When he awakens, he finds a note from Ruth stating she is actually a conscious vampire that was sent to spy on him. She warns him to run because the conscious vampires plan to capture and execute him because he has killed many of their kind. Neville thinks he can come to a reasoning with the conscious vampires and decides to stay, but is unsuccessful and is captured. Ruth then sneaks to his cell and offers him suicide pills as an act of mercy. As he takes the pills, his final thoughts are how humans will fall into the realm of myth and his existence will be nothing more than a legend in the New World. I Am Legend is extremely unique in the sense that it completely changed how we saw zombies without even being about them. The vampires in the novel operate much like we expect zombies to now, but this was not the case when it was written. Matheson took the previously magical-based concept of vampires and made it make sense from a scientific standpoint. This is largely reflective of the medical revolution that took place in the 20th century, and modern medical science clearly interested Matheson. It was from this point on where the concept of zombies branched drastically, with one major section focusing on zombies from a scientific perspective, usually a pandemic that causes an apocalypse, and the original perspective was zombies stemming from a magical source such as a necromancer or voodoo magician. Another important aspect that this book helped develop was the post-apocalyptic setting that has become almost synonymous with the zombie genre. One of the major aspects of the novel is Neville's struggle with isolation and his constant search for other surviving humans. Because of this book is more of a psychological horror, with these concepts being the most prevalent. For the protagonist, the real fear is not of his death, but the death of humanity as a whole. This also touches on evolution and how humans will probably not always be the predominant life on Earth forever, and we may even evolve into something else entirely. I Am Legend received a film adaptation 10 years later in 1964 with a few changes, but nothing incredibly significant. More importantly, however, the novel and film were both a major inspiration for what is probably the most important zombie film ever released, Night of the Living Dead. Released in 1968 and directed by George Romero, the film quickly became a classic and has about everything you'd expect in a zombie film. Two siblings, Johnny and Barbara, are visiting their father's grave when they're suddenly attacked by a pale man. The man kills Johnny by slamming his head into a tombstone and chases Barbara into an abandoned farmhouse nearby. There she meets a man named Ben who fortifies the house with her as more zombies make their way up to it. Upon further search of the house, they find a group of people who have already taken refuge in the basement and conflict ensues. In the group is Harry with his wife and their daughter who has been bitten by a zombie, and a young couple, Tom and Judy. Ben and Harry get into an argument over whether they should stay upstairs or if they should barricade themselves in the basement as more of the zombies gather outside of the building. Meanwhile, the others find a TV set upstairs and use it to learn updates on the crisis currently unfolding. From it, they learn all dead human beings are being reanimated into ghouls because of radiation from a satellite that exploded in the atmosphere while returning from Venus. The reporter also mentions a nearby rescue camp which the group agrees they need to make their way to. They devise a plan to refuel Ben's truck so they can escape the house, which is now swarming with ghouls. The couple makes their way to a fuel pump while Ben gives cover fire and Harry tosses Molotovs out the upstairs window. Unfortunately, the couple somehow makes a giant boo-boo and ends up setting the entire truck on fire, killing them both in the process. The ghoul zombies then coordinate an attack on the house and begin breaking through the door when Harry and Ben start fighting amongst themselves, and Ben ends up shooting Harry, killing him. The zombies break into the house and kill Barbara, while the daughter, who has now turned, begins eating her father and then kills her mother. Ben manages to barricade himself downstairs and hides in the basement for several hours until sunrise. The zombies have mostly dispersed and a rescue squad has made their way onto the farm, so Ben makes his way upstairs. And then Ben lives happily ever after. Just kidding, they thought he was a zombie and they shot him in the head. The end. It's honestly very impressive how many different conflict points Romero was able to establish and explore in the hour and a half this film runs. This film effectively created the now common idea of a zombie horde, with a seemingly endless number of walking corpses trying to devour the protagonists that they have to fight and run from. We also see a protagonist change in the film. Barbara seems to be the main character at first, but after about a third of the way in, it shifts to Ben as the main focus. This happens because the death of her brother put her in a state of shock for nearly the rest of the movie, leaving her mostly silent and doing almost nothing unless explicitly instructed to do so. This shift showcases the mental stress of the situation and causes Barbara to become nothing more than a helpless bystander and eventually dies because of it. This idea became very influential in the zombie genre, especially in long-running formats like comics where the main character can change frequently. Another significant influence of the film is the introduction of human versus human conflicts. While we do see human versus human conflict in the Magic Island, the conflict here is fundamentally different. All humans are fighting against the zombies, but in the Magic Island, the zombies are serving the Voodoo Master murder instead of acting independently. In the case of Night of the Living Dead, the sheer chaos caused by the zombie outbreak puts people who you would think would need to work together in conflict with one another. Primarily over a fight for power and decision-making, but also partially because of all the uncertainty the situation has caused. This idea is fleshed out further in later zombie adaptations, but the roots of it lie here in Night of the Living Dead. The film also helped further establish core zombie rules, like how to kill a zombie you have to stab them in the head, and that a zombie's primary goal is to murder humans and eat their flesh. Although there are some exceptions made, and some of the rules here are different than what we are used to today. The first zombie we see actually kills Johnny, then immediately goes for Barbara, not bothering to even nibble at his victim. He also exhibits great motor function as he chases Barbara and even picks up a brick to smash a car window. The zombies overall typically act slightly more intelligent and physically capable than adaptations prior and even most that came after. Another interesting attribute of the zombies is that the cause of the reanimation is radiation instead of a disease like in I Am Legend. Because of this, no one actually needs to be infected to turn into a zombie. Literally any dead person will come back to life as a zombie so long as their brain is intact. While I Am Legend focused on a post-apocalyptic world, Night of the Living Dead's setting has us in what is potentially the beginning stages of an apocalypse. There is hope for humankind at the end of this film, even if all of our protagonists did not make it out of the night. Though even if they managed to contain the immediate zombie horde problem, there is still the ongoing radiation issue that also requires remedy. The open ending leaves many possibilities for the result of the world and makes the viewer wonder what could happen next in an event like this. This open-endedness might be why this film ended up being so influential, leaving so many people with their own ideas of how a zombie apocalypse scenario could play out. While other zombie films had been released before Night of the Living Dead, most of them did not develop the zombie concept much farther than had already been done before, nor were they as influential. Most of them based their concepts on Haitian folklore that Seabrook had already done. For example, The Plague of the Zombies 1966 actually used a plague as the source of infection, as the name implies, but ended with the true source being Haitian voodoo magic. That being said, this film actually was fairly influential in terms of visuals for the zombie genre. Despite this, Romero is given most of the credit for the first zombie craze, which lasted from the late 60s to the mid-80s. The most popular undead films at the time were ones he made, and his second film, Dawn of the Dead, which built off themes of his first movie, debuted in 1978. The primary distinction with this one is it mostly takes place in a shopping mall, which ends up becoming a staple setting for the zombie genre afterwards because of it, and a steep increase in action, another important influence we'll touch on in a minute. This era of zombie popularity lasted until about the point where Romero released his third zombie film, Day of the Dead, in 1985, and he went on a zombie hiatus to focus on other horror concepts. Romero's dominance over this time frame is why many people refer to this era as the Romero era. Romero is often praised for using zombies not just as a horror element, but also as a vehicle for broader concepts like human greed and government incompetence, which is illustrated in his second zombie film. Other notable films during this era include Hell of the Living Dead, Return of the Living Dead, and Zombie 2. Something else worth noting is the popular tabletop role-playing game Dungeons & Dragons was released during Romero's reign over zombie media in 1974 and also featured walking corpses known as zombies. Necromancers were first introduced in Greyhawk, the first supplement rulebook to the first edition of the game. Necromancers used their powerful magics to raise armies of undead and command them in similar fashion to the Magic Island. While the origin of necromancy in this case finds its roots in Homer's Odyssey from the 17th century and more recently fantasy novels like Lord of the Rings, it was still influenced greatly by Romero, especially visually speaking. While not as popular, this influence did branch zombies in a different direction, one that is still used today in fantasy settings and games like Magic the Gathering, Elder Scrolls, Dragon Age, and more. It was also during this era that we see one of the most recognizable zombie depictions in the music industry, Michael Jackson's Thriller of 1982. The music video acts almost as a short film with more than half of the production being conversation and story building instead of actual music. This music video really helped solidify the idea of what a zombie is to the general public and pushed zombies into an iconic cultural phenomenon. After this period, zombies were in a weird spot. Everyone knew what a zombie was, but after Romero's break from this horror subgenre, the theme became one mostly associated with the underground film industry. Zombie films were still being made, but none of them really caught the attention of the public. That didn't last forever though, and zombies were soon to crawl their way into a new media altogether where they were to achieve their highest popularity yet. In 1993, video game producer Tokuro Fujiwara began development on a remake to his 1989 puzzle horror game Sweet Home, where 5 characters explore a zombie-ridden mansion. The remake went through many iterations, and Fujiwara even cited Romero's Dawn of the Dead as a main inspiration during production. When I saw the movie, I was dissatisfied with some of the plot twists and action sequences. I thought, if I was making this movie, I'd do this or that differently. Development finished 3 years later, and in 1996, Biohazard, more commonly known as Resident Evil in the West, was released to the public. In the game, you choose to play as either Chris Redfield or Jill Valentine, Team Alpha members of Raccoon City's Special Tactics and Rescue Service, aka STARS. Following several murders in the city's outskirts, STARS Team Bravo is sent to investigate. Contact with Team Bravo is lost shortly after, and Team Alpha is then sent into the scene. They discover Team Bravo's crashed helicopter when they're suddenly attacked and are forced to retreat into an old abandoned mansion. Inside the mansion are several zombie-like abominations that lurk about, and certain team members get separated from the group depending on what character you play as. After investigating, you uncover illegal experiments by a company called the Umbrella Corporation involving a bioengineered disease called the T-virus. You discover a secret underground laboratory, and it's revealed that one of the Team Alpha members, Albert Wesker, was secretly working as a double agent for the Umbrella Corp. There are multiple endings to the game depending on the choices and actions you make, but in the good ending, you manage to defeat the giant super soldier experiment, rescue your teammates, and find the conveniently placed self-destruct button in the laboratory and get out alive. Resident Evil combines horror and puzzle elements as you search the mansion, fighting off lingering zombies while you simultaneously search for clues and solve puzzles to venture deeper into the mansion. The graphics are especially good for the time because of the use of a static camera and pre-rendered background, which is significantly less demanding than first or third person perspective games. The zombies in this game follow the standard that Romero had set in his films, however it also features tyrants, which are grotesque abominations with mismatched body parts, similar to that of Frankenstein. Romero's influence on the game can also be seen by the way Fujiwara uses zombies as a tool for storytelling rather than using it for the sake of zombies themselves. The zombies here play a supporting role and support the horror scenery of the game while the story unfolds in the world around them and the true enemy, the Umbrella Corp, is revealed. It's also worth noting how the disease that created these zombies was bioengineered by a corporation basically run by mad scientists as opposed to the accident in Romero's works. Resident Evil was an immediate success worldwide upon release and almost single-handedly brought zombies back to the forefront of everyone's attention. I say almost because there was one more game that released later that year, and this one truly cemented zombie games as an action genre for at least the next 2 decades. The light gun rail shooter, The House of the Dead. If you're unfamiliar, light gun games are the cabinets you see in arcades with fake guns attached to them that you use to point at the screen and shoot with. Rail shooters are a variation of these, where all of the movement is done automatically for you as you defeat each enemy in the scene. The origin of these games lie in theme park dark rides, which traverse the attendants on actual rails while in a cart. The House of the Dead is a high-paced action game with constant gunslinging action and was quite controversial because of it. The entire city of Indianapolis attempted to ban the game altogether a few years after it was released, stating that it was too obscene and violent for the public, but the ban was struck down due to being unconstitutional. The zombies in this game range from your standard human type to zombie gargoyles, slugs, spiders, and even frogs, which was different from the strict humanoid zombies which were most standard at the time. Since it's just an arcade game, it's fairly short, but there is a brief story to it, which also features a mad scientist like in Resident Evil, but a leak from the scientist's laboratory causes the zombie outbreak to occur. Nearly every zombie game released after 1996 can trace their origins and inspirations back to at least one of these 2 games. It's honestly difficult to accurately express the cultural impact of these 2 games because of how many zombie games have been released in the past 3 decades. Simply put, they are the roots of the zombie game genre, which has since branched off in many different directions with hundreds if not thousands of different titles since their release. The most popular of these games are arcade-style shooters with seemingly endless hordes of zombies that you have to fight and try to survive as long as possible against. Games like Left 4 Dead, No More Room in Hell, Call of Duty Zombies, Killing Floor, and many more follow this formula, and it's easily the most popular style of zombie game. Zombies are particularly popular for this style of game because it allows an excuse for large swarms of humanoid targets that you can pump full of lead without all the moral questionability of killing actual humans. It also provides an interesting setting with deserted urban complexes with limited resources that in other contexts don't normally make sense to fight in. There are, however, several cases where the primary goal is storytelling and decision making as opposed to gunslinging action. The Last of Us and the Walking Dead games are the most well known of this type. Oftentimes you're required to make difficult decisions, and if you pick poorly they can lead to the loss of resources or even life. These games highlight the apocalypse aspect of the zombie genre and show that sometimes the worst part of a zombie apocalypse isn't the zombies. In some ways they can be even more emotionally impactful than films because your choices affect the world and playing as the characters makes it feel more real. Developers will sometimes blur the lines between the arcade and narrative zombie genre to provide a mix of psychological horror and action into one package. This is accomplished in titles like Dead Island, Dying Light, and State of Decay. These games can range anywhere from linear to open world and usually use exploration as a primary mechanic. Around this same time, zombies even ascended the horror genre altogether and could be found represented even in cutesy-esque media like Plants vs. Zombies or Minecraft as generic stand-in mobs. These games sparked an interest in zombie themes for other media as well, with zombie movies seeing a drastic rise in popularity, many based heavily off the high-action gameplay of The House of the Dead. Probably the most notable of these being the long-running comic series The Walking Dead that debuted in 2003, which was further popularized by the television series adaptation that began in 2010. While the zombies themselves don't bring much new to the table, Robert Kirkman used the post-apocalyptic world filled with the undead to showcase the human relationships in such a scenario. While zombies remain a constant threat throughout the entire series, their danger is eventually overshadowed by the threat of other human communities as they fight over resources and territory in the new world. The Walking Dead became extremely influential as well, mainly because of these human versus human concepts that it expanded upon. Resident Evil and The House of the Dead both received film adaptations as well, the former going on to become a successful movie franchise and the latter not so much. Romero even returned to making zombie films due to the resurgence of the 2000s, releasing 3 more films: Land of the Dead in 2005, Diary of the Dead in 2008, and Survival of the Dead in 2010. Part of his inspiration to return was 28 Days Later in 2002 and a remake of his film Dawn of the Dead in 2004, which sparked interest in the horror topic again. Zombies became so popular around this time period that many parodies of the genre sprouted up and zombie comedy basically became its own subgenre. Films like Shaun of the Dead and Zombieland, and video games like Dead Rising and Lollipop Chainsaw poke fun at the common tropes of this era, with more lighthearted plots and some over-the-top violence and gore to become classics in their own right. This resurgence of zombie popularity lasted until the mid-2010s when zombie-themed media began to face criticism for its unoriginality and lack of inspiration. It had seemed as though every good idea had already been written, every good game already made, and every joke already said. With how big the genre had gotten during this time, it's not surprising that the public eventually got burned out on the concept. There's only so many ways you can kill a zombie or forward a plot based upon them. Viewership for The Walking Dead fell, and The Last of Us 2 received extremely mixed reviews at release, marking the end of another era for zombies. So far, we've discussed the what, when, and the where, which leaves us with the why. Why do we love zombies so much? The zombie seems extremely tame at first thought compared to other beasts and monsters we've created to scare ourselves over the years. A zombie is no stronger than an ordinary human. In fact, most times they're considerably weaker. But we still fear them. It's instinctual to us. Corpses are rotting flesh, naturally they carry death and disease with them. They bear the faces of our loved ones, yet are empty vessels with no soul. We have literally evolved to be disgusted by the sight and smell of them. And the real threat of a zombie is not the one, but the many. Endless hordes of them that only grow as the pandemic rampages on. Limited resources and a collapsing society. And during the apocalypse, as humans fight over these limited resources, even the alive humans can become monsters. Right now, it's safe to say we're on the declining side of this era. Zombie games and movies are still being made, they're just not as popular as they were a decade or so ago. Who knows, they may evolve yet again, and in the future, what a zombie is will be nothing like what it is now. Are zombies going to come back again as big as they were before? Or will they fade into the past like so many other tropes have? I don't really know, but I guess that's something we have to all decide together. If there's any other influential themes or media I missed, leave a comment on the video. I'm interested in hearing what you all have to think about it. Also, this is by far the most effort I've ever put into a video before, so if you enjoyed it at all, I would really appreciate it if you could like the video. And if you want to see more content like this, subscribe as well, because I plan on making more videos like this one soon. The other videos currently on this channel are pretty much just jokes, but I'll probably end up making more of those too. Anyway, regardless of that, thanks a lot for watching the video. Peace.